releasing in 2004, a mere 2-ish years after Fusion, we get Metroid Zero Mission. Instead of going deeper into the Metroid timeline, this one kind of takes it a few steps back and gives us a little more detailed retelling of Samus's first mission, or her zeroist? What would the suffix for zero be? Whatever, it doesn't really matter for our purposes. It's the first game, Metroid, except updated. And updated heavily. This kind of remake is fairly unique. By that I mean, it's a remake that all but replaces the first game. I mean, why go back to this when you have this? I mean, outside of perhaps nostalgia and or just a pure love of the series, I mean, I get it. There are games that have remakes that I enjoy and will still go back and play the original. Resident Evil 2 comes to mind, but then there are games like Zero Mission that kind of make the original feel super outdated. And it's not just Zero Mission either. Resident Evil and its GameCube remake are another great example in my mind. The original Resident Evil 1 is fine, but the remake blows it out of the water, to the point where playing the original almost feels kind of like a letdown. The same can be said with Zero Mission. The original is fine. It serves as the initial introduction to the series, and without that, we more than likely wouldn't have any Metroid at all. It still holds a special place in the hearts of the fans for sure. I know it does for me anyway. But when you take that game and put it up against this, I'll take this any day of the week. It looks great, it adds cutscenes, subtle context to Samus, her time on Zebes. The art style is fun, the colors pop, the controls are tight, and Samus even has some of her old movement tech from Super. It took the building blocks that Fusion laid down and added in some Super DNA to make it kind of like a blend of both games. It's a fun game that still holds up supremely well today. Above all that, however, it adds to the original in a very meaningful way. It's what a remake should strive to be. Hold the original source material in high regard and build on top of that. Bring the initial vision to life in the best way possible. How's it going, everybody? My name is Leon, and I want to welcome you all back to the Metroid Retrospective. At this point, it should come as no surprise that the game was developed by Sakamoto and crew from R&D1. In a small twist, however, and this is a fun fact for you, he's the only person who was working on the original Metroid that is still working on Metroid to this day. That's right, every other original developer has jumped ship at some point, either to a different part of Nintendo or to other companies as a whole. Sakamoto is the sole survivor from the original 1986 development team. It's kind of crazy to think about. In the early development of Zero Mission, it was suggested that Super Metroid be ported to the Game Boy Advance. That was a short-lived idea, however. As cool as it would have been to have a portable Super Metroid, especially because the GBA was seen as a portable Super Nintendo, more or less, the team decided to go all the way back to the original starting point with Metroid. They wanted to get back to the roots of the series. Sakamoto is quoted with saying, "We wanted to show people who had never played a Metroid game prior to Fusion the roots of the Metroid franchise. That is what Metroid is. This is the style of gameplay that Metroid sprang from. At the same time, retell the story of Samus's original mission. Being that both Fusion and Zero Mission are on the GBA, it should come as no surprise, really, that they use the same engine. They wanted to make the game feel new and still be reminiscent of the original game. A fine line to walk for sure." As a fun bonus fact, Fusion and Zero Mission are the only two mainline 2D games to exist on the same hardware. That's kind of odd, right? Feels like it should be wrong? It's not. Should though. In the same vein, Zero Mission was planned to have some kind of functionality with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. That was let go at some point, however, I guess they couldn't really make that work. Too long of a window between releases and the dev teams just couldn't figure out a good way to make that happen. It makes you wonder what would have been added to either game. Well, you can link up with Fusion though. If you did that, you got a few neat little things. Nothing super major, just the end screens from Fusion. But some of those were Japan exclusive up to that point, so, that's kinda neat. Other than that, the addition of cutscenes added to the game overall, and really brought into focus the story the original wanted to tell, but, just couldn't. On top of that, this game is the first time you can choose the difficulty setting outright, so that's kind of fun. All in all, the dev team did a fantastic job taking the original concept and evolving it. Alright, here's where we can start to have a little bit of fun. Gameplay changes. Honestly, this is probably one of my favorite things to talk about. Not just in this game, but really any game. Gameplay mechanics are just really interesting to dive into and examine. Outside of just, how a player interacts with the game, but also the hows and whys of the development team and the choices they made. All that said, let's just dive right into it. What is different with Zero Mission? When compared to Fusion? Quite a bit, actually. For starters, Samus regains her wall jumps from Super. That's right, you can just hop on a wall for as long as you like, assuming you can do the tech, just like in Super. Along with that, you regain the ability to bomb jump. It works more or less the same as it did in Super, although I find you might have a little more flexibility in Zero Mission's implementation of it. Like this, for example. If you manage it, you can move basically at a 45-degree angle. What does that do for you? Well, we can get to that in just a bit. Just keep it in mind for now. With all this movement tech, you can do some fun stuff like you could in Super. But only some stuff. The game is still portable after all, and add to that being a remake of the original game from the Nintendo, it's not very large. So, while you can get to places out of order and pick certain items up ahead of schedule, you won't really be breaking the game in half like with Super. It still has some structure to it. New to the game are power-ups that weren't in the original, things like Speed Booster. Just like in Fusion, all you need is a good stretch of land and Samus is off to the races. Unlike Fusion, however, I feel like it takes maybe just a little bit longer to engage, which is weird. It being on a handheld, you only have a few buttons, so, no run button, and no way to manipulate the controls to activate it any faster. The power grip makes an appearance here. This allows Samus to wall hang just like she did in Fusion. It's super handy overall, and makes Samus feel that much better to control. On the topic of control, actually, Samus feels just right. She has a good amount of weight, and the reactions of turning and jumping feel perfect. It's super tight. It doesn't feel floaty like it did in the older games. The only game that feels better in terms of control, in my opinion anyway, is Dread. Beam weapons continue to be a thing, and just like in the last two games, they continue to stack. That's just going to be the norm from now on, by the way. Everything is going to stack from this point forward in terms of beam weapons, with exceptions made for the Prime series of games. Unlike in Fusion, though, the beams are nowhere near as powerful. They still are a good option for default fighting and have a good sound to them, but they feel lacking when compared to Fusion. missiles are also still on a toggle, and I am so glad that that continues to be the case. That said though, they reintroduced having 2 sets of missiles. I guess having around 200 super missiles in Fusion was maybe a bit too much. It isn't as bad as it was in Super. You just hit the select button and swap between them. You don't even have to arm the missiles, you can just hot swap at any time. It's a very welcome change to how Super manages equipment. That said though, I'd still prefer how Fusion went about it. You can once again fire things at angles with the shoulder buttons. It even works with the missiles. Alright, so real quick. In Fusion, I said that the controls seemed to overwrite themselves. That may have been on me. I went and played the recent re-release of Fusion on the Switch, and the missiles were working on the toggle angle just fine. So, one of 2 things might have happened there. Either they fixed it, which is highly unlikely, or my controller was just bad and had a broken shoulder button. And you could always do this with the missiles on an angle, and that's just on me. At any rate, I recommend you try it out for yourself and let me know. I feel like I kinda goofed on that one. Sorry. Power bombs work the same way as they did in Fusion, on a toggle, and devastatingly powerful. You don't get nearly as many in Zero Mission though, only around 20 instead of like the 40 plus in Fusion. Now, with all that refinement, how does that impact the bones of the original Metroid? With this being a remake, it certainly has the original's DNA in there, but with that comes new ways to explore some zones. Everything from the original game is here, lovingly recreated and given new life. Each area has its own music, background art, and colorization. The areas feel infinitely more defined because of this. No more black backgrounds everywhere. The map has a ton more flow to it, and because every area is so well defined, you don't run into the same problems that the original had. This one section of Kraid's lair that had 3 identical rooms, they're technically still there, but because they went back and rebuilt the whole area, it's far easier to navigate. In fact, every area is easier to navigate and explore. Things are telegraphed much better and give clues on how to progress. Take these large purple and orange orbs, for example. They block your path in a few places, but if you notice in one area, the game kinda shows you how to deal with them. You just gotta let these, space ticks? Let them hitch a ride on you, and they eat the orb thing. That's pretty awesome. I like that kind of thing. In addition to those environmental puzzles are the speed booster tracks, or the shine spark puzzles if you want. I didn't really mention them in Fusion, but somebody has a thing for these puzzles. The speed booster puzzles in Fusion were few and far between, but, immensely satisfying. I'm happy to say that they are just as great to pull off here, but good God, some of these are absolutely nuts. Never mind the few that are straightforward, those are easy enough with proper shine spark tech, but this? What is this? Right, here we go. Run through the door, hold the spark, double back through the door, morph ball, jump as the morph ball, make sure you hit the slope, done. Except you're not done. Make sure you hold left, then down, then bomb the floor, jump as the morph ball again, hold left, and now you're done. And that's just one. There are a few of these scattered around the game, and for the most part, they're at that level of crazy. Hope you got some excellent reaction times. On a lighter note, the game also gives some new bosses to fight, one of which happens, more or less, right at the beginning of the game. I won't spoil them all because they're fun to find in the world and you should experience them in the wild. Speaking of the world, there are a few new areas to check out and explore. They aren't super large, but a new area is a new area. You get to go to Criteria and the Chozo Ruins. Both are welcome additions to the game. There are 2 other new areas, but I'll save those for the story talk, as they are kinda spoiler territory. Along the way, you'll find unknown items. These kinda fit into what I was saying in Fusion. These things being downloads and all, as they don't exactly mesh with Samus's suit right off the bat. They are important to find though, you'll need them to progress as you get deeper into the game. Overall, the changes to the game were definitely needed, if not because of the old bones this game was built off of, but also because of the handheld nature. once again, I find myself talking about a portable Metroid title. Good times. So, why is Zero Mission so similar and yet somehow so different from Fusion? A lot of it has to do with the overall development. In Fusion, the team wanted to make a brand new story and needed to try and build the world around that. I feel they succeeded in that regard. Fusion has its shortcomings, but as a more narratively driven game, it does very well in setting its tone and direction. Makes you feel like you are alone on a space station, 20 minutes at a time. Zero Mission, being based off of the original Metroid, has a few other things going for it though. One of those things is simply just being an NES game, but, redone. Because it's such a small game, way smaller than Fusion, it's easier to break down into manageable, bite-sized chunks. Every area is fairly small. It certainly isn't super big, but it's also not Fusion size. It's NES size. Some of these redone areas are redone quite well. They even add in some things taken straight from Super, but they still couldn't make the game that large without taking away from the source material. It was meant to be a remake of the original after all, so instead they filled the game up with a ton of things to collect and add in some mystery to keep you going. One of the first things you happen across is a Chozo statue. These act as waypoints, kind of like the computer in Fusion, only way less chatty. They still give you a point to check out, and early on, it's a good idea to just kind of follow the path. You don't really have the tools to explore on your own just yet. Also, they refill your ammo and heal you. This encourages you to jump into the hands. Not only do you get the heal, but a helpful push in the right direction. At a few points, sometimes, not often, they kind of also block your progress, which is a little weird. Again, it doesn't happen often, but if you explore early enough, you will find one or two of these Chozo statues that you just can't get past, which is, interesting. Save points are abundant in Zero Mission, mostly because of the portable nature they had to be. No one wants to lose progress because of battery failure. At almost any point, you are never more than a handful of screens away from a save point, kind of like in Fusion. The intro areas to each zone also have a save spot relatively close by. They aren't as direct about it like they are in Fusion, but, they're still there. The other thing that this game does differently from Fusion is the hint system. I find it strange that most people tend to like the way that Zero Mission points you in the right direction, but not in Fusion. If I had to guess why, it's because in Fusion you're straight being told what to do and where to go, rather than, being encouraged to explore an area. That said, though, functionally they serve the same purpose. The exploration is tuned up from Fusion, so if that's what you like in a Metroid game, and honestly to some level we all do, then you will like what this has to offer. With no Federation to rein Samus in, the only thing stopping you from blitzing through the game is your own skill level and certain story beats. They can't have you zipping past everything. That said, there is some straight goofy stuff you can pull off if you want to try. I mentioned earlier that you can bomb jump at angles. Well, if you want to, you can get certain items ahead of time, like the Varia suit here. Could you wait until you get the ice beam and freeze the enemy to make a nice little jumping platform? Sure, but why not try and have a little bit of fun with it, specifically with this type of movement tech? I did the same thing here to get a super missile pickup that you might have had to wait a little bit to get otherwise. The two main bosses serve as your big checkboxes, Kraid and Ridley. Once you deal with them, and you can do that fairly quickly, the sooner you can get some Mother Brain. Right, so here we are. Because this is a remake of the original, it hits the same story beats for the most part. And I say for the most part because, the original just kind of tossed you in the game with very little to go off of. Zero Mission gives some quick hits right off the rip, even with some dialogue before you start the game proper. It adds way more context for the player on startup without relying on the instructional booklet. That's still there, and it does add to the story overall, but, for the most part, it still is just Metroid with, hindsight and a nice new coat of paint. I'm going to be getting into the story from this point forward, so if you would like to avoid some spoiler talk, and there is a lot to spoil here if you haven't played the game before, I'm going to go ahead and put a time code right down there. Go ahead and skip to the final thoughts portion. Hey, just like the last video, while you're down there fishing for that there time code in the description, why not hit the subscribe button, huh? Be a big help. I'd appreciate it. If you want to, maybe take it a step further, feel free to share the video around. Get some friends in on the action. Alright, are we good? Are we alright? Alright, if we're good, I'm going to be diving in. Let's get to it. Cool. Alright, story-wise, not much is different from the original game. Samus is still sent to the space pirate base on Zebes. She is still a one-woman army not to be taken lightly, and she is still tasked with destroying the base and all the Metroids housed within. After the opening cinematic and some dialogue from Samus herself, we open up on the exact same frame as the original. Complete with the morph ball on the left. Classic Zebes. Things take an interesting turn when almost immediately you find a Chozo statue that lights the way. After checking that, you can find some missiles, and with that, a whole new boss. If this catches you off guard, don't worry. I'm sure it did for most first-time players. One fun thing about this boss, if you don't take it out right away, it leaves and tries to ambush you later at another spot. You end up exploring some old favorite areas on Zebes, places like Norfair and Brinstar, and new to this version, some places from Super Metroid like Criteria, and even some new locations outright. The Chozo ruins are brand new and provide some fun power-ups like the Power Grip. You get sent there eventually by the Chozo statues, or, if you enjoy exploration, you just kinda happen upon them. As mentioned earlier, you may want to follow the guides from the Chozo, if only because you need things like the long beam and North ball bombs to even consider actually exploring areas proper. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting very far at all. Along the way, you'll find these power-ups on some of the Chozo statues. They take to you and the suit, but you get an error. Somehow they're incompatible with your power suit. I mean, they're Chozo designs, they should work, right? At the very least, they let you get rid of these pesky blocks that were blocking you. Maybe you just need the Varia suit? Maybe the base power suit just isn't enough? Maybe we should keep an eye open for that then. After some exploring and general directions from the Chozo GPS, you wind up at Kraid's lair. This fight is so much better than it is in the original. It plays more or less like the fight from Super Metroid, which is great. It's got good music, fun sounds, and overall, pretty decent mechanics for Kraid. Now it's less about force-feeding Kraid a bunch of missiles and more about precision, getting the missiles into the mouth. In fact, a lot of the bosses here deal in precision rather than just blowing them away with missiles. Although there are, some notable exceptions. Once Kraid explodes and you get the power-up that was in the room off to the side there, you get to go to the next area. Looks like Norfair, and then Ridley's lair. During the course of your travels, while you run from area to area, sometimes when you enter a new area, you get some fun cutscenes. It happened with Kraid, and now you're going to be getting a few featuring Ridley. In fact, you even got some with Mother Brain around the start of the adventure. That's just some good storytelling right there. Kinda makes you feel like you're on a bit of a timer, right? Like Mother Brain knows you're in the base, and they're not just going to let you run amok, especially after taking out Kraid. At this point, you should have already gotten the Varia suit. If not, you're not gonna like the superheated rooms. When you get to it, looks like the mystery items are still not compatible. That's odd. In the original, you didn't get any more suit upgrades. The gravity suit wasn't a thing yet. Maybe you just need an additional item then. Once you clear out Norfair and get to Ridley's lair, you get a slight misdirect. You enter the boss room and find nothing but a door. No fight. Which is strange. The door leads to another upgrade, so that's good. One more item for the ever-growing arsenal. Once you leave, Ridley strikes. I'm happy to say that they toned down the Ridley screech. It's still loud, but it's not fusion loud. Unlike Kraid, Ridley is all about maximum firepower. Unload everything you got into him. This fight is so much more improved from the original. It has so much more appeal. Mixed in with the great music when fighting Ridley, and it's so much better. Almost no comparison. After enough missiles and beam weapons, if you run out of missiles, Ridley explodes. With that, the gate to Torian opens. At this point, there really isn't much more to do. You can spend some time gathering any items you might have missed, but eventually you'll need to head to the final confrontation. Once in Torian, you find the Metroids. Just like before, Ice Beam and missile them down. 5 per, or 1 super missile if you feel like being swift. Eventually, you come face to case with Mother Brain. Unlike in the original, though, the brain won't just let you lay into it. It actually fires off some kind of purple beam at you, and they do a good amount of damage to boot. In fact, this whole area is just a few notches up in terms of overall difficulty. The turrets and atomic Cheerios do decent damage, and the lava is also a heavy hitter. Don't lose your footing. After some well-placed shots, the brain goes down and the timer starts. You make your escape up that shaft and back to your ship, just like in Super. That's cool. It's a nice touch. It's a little odd, though. You never found out what those mystery items were. Oh well, guess they were just for the blocks? I mean, that's weird, but alright. Samus powers down her suit and flies off, only to be shot down and forced back onto the planet's surface. Okay, for real. This is it. This is your last chance to skip ahead. We got some spoilers coming up. At this point, Samus fills us in on her situation. Armed with just an emergency pistol and her new, now iconic Zero suit, she decides to infiltrate the space pirate mothership. At this point, the game takes on a huge tone shift, and for the briefest of moments, we get a strange, Metroid/Metal Gear hybrid? It takes a hard turn into stealth action. The stealth isn't particularly great, but it is fun, if not maybe a little novel. When you get caught, and you will get caught, the music picks up and the pirates give chase. You can't kill them. The pistol only stuns, but it might be enough to get away and reset the area. Each shot from the pirates does huge damage, taking off an entire pip of your energy bar per hit. I hope you got good at all the movement tech. Wall jumps and ledge grabs are your friends here. Also, Samus can, in fact, crawl. As you frantically make your way through the ship, you can find an exit that brings you to another set of Chozo ruins. This area is also pretty heavily guarded. If you manage to make it to the end, you get a mural. This shows a Chozo in a somewhat familiar-looking suit of armor. This triggers a boss fight, and a fairly unique one at that. It's less about just shooting at it, and more about timing and precision. You need to shoot the orb as it turns into a symbol. Dealing any other damage to it just hurts you. It's a test to see if you're worthy, to see your resolve. It came to life because Samus has some Chozo DNA in her, the Warrior's test. Are you brave enough to face yourself and the unknown? Should you succeed, you get an upgraded power suit. This looks more like the Samus we know. In fact, all those items, those downloads from earlier, they become fully operational now. Samus has her fully upgraded power suit, complete with the gravity mod, the space jump, plasma beam, and soon, the power bombs. The music changes, and Samus can now lay waste to the pirates. Tone shifting again makes you feel like you earned the power. In fact, you're so strong now, the pirates actually try to hide from you. Making your way to the bridge, you fight one last boss, Mecha Ridley. Again, a fight that requires you to be very precise with your shots, as Mecha can only be hit in the chest plate, which is guarded by its neck and arms. You have a very narrow attack window. Once you succeed, you make your way to a shuttle launch bay and leave the ship as it explodes. And that's the game. Alright, before we welcome back all the others who bailed out for spoiler reasons, one thing that I didn't really mention in Fusion, but I will here, as it's also present in Zero Mission, is the endgame cleanup. In Super, and in the earlier titles, you could reasonably grab all the power-ups in any given location if you had the right tools for the job, and if you didn't, you could come back later when you did. In Fusion and in Zero Mission, you can still grab a good amount of pickups, but if you want everything, you can't until the very end. In fact, you don't even get the power bombs until the last moments of Zero Mission. I mean, it's okay, I guess. Heading back to the earlier sections of the game after getting maximum power does show off just how far Samus has come on this journey, but it also feels kind of off. Like, yeah, maybe I don't need 250 missiles to wrap up the game, but did 75 of them really need to be held off until after I get the upgraded suit? I don't think so. Not really, anyway. And then add to that a whole new collectible right at the end with the power bombs. It does give reason to go back and explore the world more, but at, like, what cost? I don't really want to put off the end of the game just so I can go grab a few more energy tanks, you know? Feels like it ruins the power fantasy and, honestly, kind of the pace. You should be an unstoppable force at the end game, not one that feels the need to check every nook and cranny. Just my thoughts, though. Hey, welcome back, everybody who jumped ahead a little bit. glad to have you here again. Overall, I think this game is pretty great. It definitely brings the first game up to current standards and is a solid entry point for those who maybe want to try the game and start at the very beginning to get the whole story without, game hopping. The only thing I will say that's kind of a problem is it all but erases the need to play the original. I mean, that's not really a bad thing, as the original can be very obtuse in its design and in the mechanics, but rather than add to the original, this game just kind of outright replaces it. I'll still go back and play the original from time to time, but if I want to experience Samus's first mission, Zero Mission, I'll be jumping into this title before going back to the original pretty much every time. If you haven't yet, or are waiting to experience this title in the future, you might be waiting a little bit. I imagine eventually the game will join Fusion on the Switch's Game Boy Advance player, but that might take a minute. The Big N is a bit slow at updating that kind of functionality. Otherwise, you're going to want to try and hunt down a physical copy. But, good luck with that. As always, emulation is an option, but should it find itself a re-release eventually, I would urge you to grab that if you can and show support for the series. Metroid right now is on an upswing, and I would personally like to have it stay that way if possible. No one wants to wait like 18 years for a sequel, right? Whew, man, I'm sure we would all dread that. For now, though, I'm gonna sign off. I'll see you all next time as we talk about the latest in Samus' side-scrolling adventures. See you next mission. Hey there, everyone. Glad to see you all made it to the end card. As always, I appreciate your support and all the comments. It's been pretty great to see everybody's perspectives and their takeaways from the series so far. Dread is the next title I'm looking to wrap up in this retrospective, for now, anyway. After that, well, let me know what you think I should take a look at, and I'll add it to the list. See ya.